The cello calls a whisper in the dust. The drums respond, a steady rising thrust.
The tempo builds like waves on the shore, a symphony of ages forevermore. Brass rises faintly like dawn through the haze, a chorus of history setting the stage.
Drums now thunder, the earth starts to quake. Cello climbs higher, a fire in its wake. Strings weave a tapestry, grand and divine.
A crescendo erupts the eternal sands of time.
The true story of the wise men. Beyond the myth of tradition. Introduction. The silence between the lines. There is a version of the Christmas story we have all carried in our hearts since childhood. It is a scene of profound stillness, a wooden manger, a star hanging low in the sky, and 3 kings in jeweled crowns kneeling before a newborn. We have sung about them in carols and placed them in our nativity sets for decades. We feel we know them. We have counted them as 3, named them Caspar, Melchior, and Balthazar, and assumed they arrived on that very first night. But for those who have lived long enough to know that truth is often more complex than tradition, a question begins to stir. What if the story we've been told is only a shadow of the reality? If we look closely at the Gospel of Matthew, not through the lens of medieval art, but through the sober reality of the text, we discover something far more mysterious. There were no kings that night. There was no stable when they arrived. And the infant they came to see was no longer a newborn. This is not a story meant to destroy your traditions, but to enrich your faith. It is a journey into the weight of prophecy and the cost of true worship. If you are a seeker of truth, someone who values the gold of Scripture over the glitter of tradition, then stay with me. Welcome to Guardians of the Covenant. Today, we pull back the veil on the wise men, the strangers from the East who saw what the world missed. Chapter 1. The Disturbance in Jerusalem. The arrival of the Magi was not a quiet, humble event. It was a diplomatic and political earthquake. Imagine a man like Herod the Great, a ruler so paranoid he murdered his own wife and sons to protect his throne, suddenly facing a phalanx of foreign scholars at his gates. These were not mere travelers. They were the Magi. In the ancient world, the Magi were an elite class of scholars and advisors from the East, men whose wisdom influenced empires. Their arrival in Jerusalem was an act of immense courage. They didn't come to negotiate trade. They came with a question that echoed through the stone corridors of Herod's palace. Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? To understand the weight of this moment, we must strip away the layers of centuries-old tradition and see the 3 startling truths hidden in Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. The crown of wisdom, not royalty. The Bible never calls them kings. This title was added centuries later by those who wanted to match the story with ancient prophecies. But the reality is more profound. These were men of intellect and observation. They were seekers who looked at the heavens and saw the hand of the Creator. They remind us that God does not only speak through sermons and temples, He speaks to the heart that is willing to look up and wonder. 2. An uncounted multitude. We assume there were 3 because there were 3 gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But the text is silent on their number. In reality, a journey of over 1,000 miles through bandit-infested deserts, carrying vast amounts of gold, would have required a massive caravan, servants, guards, and a large retinue. 3. The house, not the stable. Perhaps the most significant revelation for the mature believer is the timing of their arrival. Tradition places them at the manger, but Matthew tells us a different story. In Matthew 2:11 it says, "On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary." The word used for Jesus is no longer brephos, newborn, but paidion, young child. By the time these men traveled across the scorching deserts of the east, Jesus was likely between 1 and 2 years old. Mary and Joseph were no longer refugees in a stable. They had settled. The lesson for the seasoned heart. Why does this matter? Why would God allow months, perhaps even 2 years, to pass before these seekers reach the Messiah? For those of us who have walked the long road of life, we know that God's timing is rarely our own. The shepherds who were near saw him instantly, but the Magi who were far had to endure the dust, the fatigue, and the long, silent nights of the desert. Their journey was not a sprint, it was a marathon of devotion. It teaches us that God meets us where we are. Some find him in an instant of revelation, while others must search for years, following a single flicker of light through the darkness. The Magi weren't chosen because they were righteous. They were chosen because they refused to stop looking. But a deeper mystery remains. How did these men from a foreign land, men who were not of the lineage of Abraham, know that a king had been born in Israel? To find the answer, we must leave the palace of Herod and travel 5 centuries back in time to the dusty libraries of Babylon, where a young captive named Daniel was about to leave a legacy that would guide these men across the sands of time. Chapter 2. The Legacy of Daniel, a voice from the dust. To understand why a group of Persian or Mesopotamian scholars would risk their lives for a Jewish king, we must look beyond the star. Signs in the sky require a map in the heart, and that map was drawn 5 centuries before the journey began, in the heart of a city of gold and idols, Babylon. In 605 BC, a young man named Daniel was taken in chains from Jerusalem to the courts of King Nebuchadnezzar. He was a prisoner, an exile, a stranger in a land of sorcerers and astrologers. But Daniel was a man of extraordinary spirit. He did not merely survive in Babylon, he ascended. Because he could interpret dreams and reveal mysteries that no other scholar could grasp, he was appointed as the chief of the Magi, Rabmag. This is the missing link that tradition often ignores. Daniel, a prophet of the Most High God, was for decades the supreme leader over the very class of men from which our wise men descended. Imagine the scene. Daniel, now an old man, sitting in the vast libraries of Babylon or Susa, surrounded by the greatest minds of the East. He didn't just teach them about the stars, he taught them about the creator of the stars. He shared the ancient scrolls, the prophecies of Moses, the songs of David, and the visions of Isaiah. But most importantly, he left behind a countdown. In Daniel chapter 9, the prophet received a specific timeline from the angel Gabriel, the famous 70 weeks prophecy. It was a mathematical blueprint that pointed directly to the arrival of the Anointed One. While the religious leaders in Jerusalem grew complacent, allowing the dust of ritual to cover their scrolls, the Magi in the East kept a vigil. They guarded the writings of Daniel as a sacred trust. They were the guardians of the covenant in a foreign land. Generation after generation, these men watched the skies, not out of superstition, but out of expectation. They knew the timeline. They knew the prophecy of Balaam in the book of Numbers. A star shall come out of Jacob, a scepter shall rise out of Israel. For 500 years, the Eastern schools of wisdom whispered a secret. He is coming, and when the star appears, the countdown is over. This realization should stir something within us today. It reveals a God who is far more intentional than we often imagine. He didn't just drop a star in the sky and hope someone would notice. He prepared the audience half a millennium in advance. He planted a witness in the heart of the enemy's territory. The Magi represent the outsiders who listened when the insiders were deaf. They remind the mature believer that God's word is never lost. It may be buried under the sands of time or kept in a foreign tongue, but when the moment of fulfillment arrives, the truth will find its way to those who are truly watching. As the years turned into centuries and the world grew dark under the shadow of the Roman Empire, the Magi's expectation reached its climax. And then, one ordinary night in the East, the sky did something it had never done before. The ancient Star of Jacob blazed into existence. The wait was over. The journey, the most expensive and dangerous expedition of their lives, was about to begin. Chapter 3. The Star, the Convergence of Two Realms. For centuries, the Star of Bethlehem has been the subject of both profound wonder and intense scientific debate. What was it that the Magi saw that was so compelling it caused them to leave everything behind? To the mature mind, we understand that God often uses his own creation, the laws of physics, and the celestial bodies he set in motion to signal his greatest acts. Astronomically, something extraordinary happened around 7 BC. Historical records and modern computer models show a rare, great conjunction. Jupiter, the planet of kings, and Saturn, the protector of Israel in ancient celestial symbolism, aligned 3 times in the constellation of Pisces. To a magus, a scholar of the heavens, this was not a coincidence. It was a sentence written in the stars. The great king is coming to the land of the Jews. But as we look deeper into Matthew's account, we realize that the Star of Bethlehem was not merely a planetary alignment, it was something that defied the very laws of nature. Matthew tells us that the star went ahead of them and eventually stopped over the place where the child was. Stars, in their fixed orbits, do not move westward and then pause over a single dwelling in a specific village. This leads us to a mystery that bridges the natural and the supernatural. Some ancient scholars believed this was the Shekinah, the visible glory of God that once led the Israelites through the wilderness as a pillar of cloud and fire. Imagine the scene through the eyes of the Magi. They had traveled over 1,000 miles following a celestial light. They had faced the scorching heat of the day and the bone-chilling cold of the desert nights. There were moments, perhaps, when the clouds obscured the light, or the path became so treacherous that reason whispered it was time to turn back. But their journey was a marathon of hope. This star was not just a light in the sky, it was a beckoning from the Creator himself. It represents the moment where general revelation, the beauty of the universe, meets special revelation, the specific call of God. For the person who has walked many years on this earth, you know that God often gets your attention through the natural, a crisis, a coincidence, or a sudden realization. But to find the king, you must follow that sign into the supernatural realm of faith. The Magi didn't just study the star, they surrendered to its direction. They crossed borders not just of geography, but of their own understanding. They were moving from the realm of knowing about God to the realm of meeting God. And as the star led them toward the small, unremarkable village of Bethlehem, the air grew heavy with a significance they could feel in their very souls. They were no longer just observers of the heavens, they were participants in the greatest story ever told. But as the light of the star guided them toward peace, a dark shadow was lengthening in Jerusalem. For whenever God's light shines brightest, the forces of darkness prepare their fiercest resistance. The Magi were about to walk into the lion's den, where an earthly king was waiting to protect his throne at any cost. Chapter 4. The Collision in Jerusalem. Knowledge without worship. As the Magi's caravan crested the hills surrounding Jerusalem, the atmosphere shifted. The serene guidance of the star was replaced by the cold, heavy tension of an earthly empire. They had expected a city in celebration. They had imagined streets lined with people awaiting their new king. Instead, they found a city that had forgotten how to look up. Jerusalem, the city of David, was under the iron grip of Herod the Great, a man whose name has become synonymous with architectural genius and monstrous cruelty. Herod was not a legitimate king of the Davidic line. He was an Idumean, a political opportunist placed on the throne by the favor of Rome. To the mature observer of history, Herod represents the ultimate symbol of the self-made man who is terrified of losing what he has built. His reign was a masterpiece of paranoia. He had murdered his own wife, Mariamne, and several of his sons, prompted by the slightest suspicion of betrayal. Augustus Caesar once famously remarked that it was safer to be Herod's pig than his son. When the Magi entered the palace and asked their fateful question, "Where is the one born King of the Jews?" they weren't just asking for directions. They were unintentionally declaring war on Herod's ego. Matthew 2:3 tells us that when Herod heard this, he was disturbed and all Jerusalem with him. Why was all Jerusalem disturbed? It wasn't just fear of Herod's temper. It was the discomfort of a people who had traded their messianic hope for a fragile worldly peace. The arrival of these strangers forced everyone to confront a truth they were trying to ignore. The most sobering part of this chapter, however, is not Herod's rage, but the reaction of the religious elite. Herod summoned the chief priests and the teachers of the law, the men who had spent their entire lives immersed in the scrolls of the prophets. He asked them where the Messiah was to be born. Without a moment's hesitation, they provided the answer. In Bethlehem in Judea, for this is what the prophet has written. They could quote Micah 5:2 from memory. They knew the city, they knew the prophecy, they knew the timing. Bethlehem was less than 6 miles away, a mere 2-hour walk from where they stood. And yet, this is where the tragedy of familiarity reveals its darkest face. The religious leaders gave the Magi the map, but they did not join the journey. Think about the weight of that silence. These foreign scholars had traveled over 1,000 miles based on a single star. They had risked everything for a king who was not even their own. Yet the men who held the very oracles of God, who lived in the shadow of the temple, couldn't be bothered to walk 6 miles to see if their long-awaited savior had arrived. For those of us who have spent decades in the faith, this is a haunting warning. It is possible to know the Bible so well that it no longer moves us. It is possible to have perfect theology and a cold heart. Proximity to truth does not guarantee a response to truth. These leaders were insiders who had become blind, while the Magi were outsiders who had eyes to see. Herod, masking his murderous intent with a veil of religious interest, sent the Magi on their way with a lie. Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him. The Magi left the halls of power, feeling the chill of Herod's deception. The contrast was now absolute. A king who wanted to kill, priests who wanted to ignore, and strangers who wanted to worship. As they stepped back out into the night, away from the heavy, suffocating air of Jerusalem's politics, something miraculous happened. The sky opened up once more. The star they had seen in the east reappeared, and for the first time in their long journey, the text says they were overjoyed. They were leaving the city of knowledge without worship and heading toward a humble village where they would find worship without pretense. The final stage of their marathon was about to reach its climax in a place no one expected. Chapter 5. The House in Bethlehem. The Theology of Prostration. Leaving the suffocating air of Jerusalem's politics, the Magi headed toward the quiet, unremarkable hills of Bethlehem. As they stepped away from the city of men, the star, the faithful messenger of God, reappeared in its full splendor. Matthew records a rare emotion for these Stoic scholars. They were overjoyed. It was the joy of a long search finally reaching its destination. When they reached the place, they did not find a stable. There was no straw, no lowing cattle, no scent of a barn. They found a house. In the months, or perhaps even years, since the birth of Jesus, the Holy Family had moved into a humble but proper dwelling. As these elite scholars crossed the threshold, they did not see a newborn infant, Brephos, but a young child, Paidion. What happened next is the most profound moment in the history of faith. These men, honored advisors to emperors, masters of ancient wisdom, did not merely bow. The text says they fell down and worshipped him. The Greek word proskuneo means to prostrate oneself completely, to touch the forehead to the ground. Imagine the weight of this scene. The wisdom of the East, aged and dignified, falling at the feet of a child who had not yet spoken a word, performed a miracle or preached a sermon. They worshipped him for who he was, not for what he had done. This is the hallmark of a mature faith. To recognize the divine even when it is wrapped in the ordinary. To see the King of the universe in the face of a toddler in a modest Bethlehem home. Then they opened their treasures. These were not random gifts. They were a prophetic confession of faith. Each gift was a brick in the foundation of the gospel. First, gold. This was the gift of kings. By laying gold at his feet, the Magi were declaring that this child held a sovereignty far greater than Herod or Caesar. Gold represented the purity and endurance of his kingdom. It was an acknowledgement of his royal authority over all nations. Second, frankincense. This was the gift of priests. Frankincense was the sacred resin burned in the temple, its smoke rising like prayers to the nostrils of God. By offering this, the Magi were declaring that this child was not just a human king, but God manifest in the flesh. He was the bridge between heaven and earth, the great high priest who would one day offer himself for the world. Image showing the symbolic meaning of gold for kingship, frankincense for divinity, and myrrh for sacrifice. Third, myrrh. This was the most haunting gift of all. Myrrh was a fragrant resin used for embalming the dead. To give myrrh to a child was a jarring, almost offensive gesture, unless you knew his destiny. The Magi, perhaps guided by a spirit they could not fully name, were acknowledging that this king had come to die. It was the scent of the cross in the cradle. It was a testimony that the path to the throne would lead through the grave. For the believer who has lived through the seasons of life, these three gifts represent our own journey. We give him our gold, our resources, and our will. We give him our frankincense, our worship, and our prayers. And we give him our myrrh, our sorrows, our brokenness, and the reality of our mortality, knowing that he is the Savior who redeemed it all. The Magi did not leave Bethlehem as they had arrived. Their treasures were empty, but their souls were full. They had looked into the eyes of the one whom Daniel had prophesied and whom the stars had announced. They had reached the center of the universe in a small room in a quiet village. But as they prepared to return, the danger they had left behind in Jerusalem was already stirring, and the final warning was about to come in the deep of the night. Why did God orchestrate it this way? Why bring strangers from thousands of miles away while the chosen leaders stayed in their palaces? The answer is the heartbeat of the gospel. The Messiah was never meant for one nation alone. From the very beginning, God was reaching for the world. The Magi were the first fruits of the nations, the outsiders who became the ultimate insiders through their willingness to seek and to sacrifice. As we look back on this journey, we must ask ourselves, where am I on this path? Are we like Herod, trying to protect our own little kingdoms at any cost? Are we like the religious leaders, knowing every prophecy but refusing to walk 6 miles to see the truth? Or are we like the Magi, willing to follow a flicker of light across a vast desert, willing to lay our treasures down before something the world calls ordinary, and willing to return by another route because we have been changed? For those of us who have lived through many seasons, we know that the star of Bethlehem doesn't appear every day, but the light of the world is always present. God still meeting seekers. He still honors the long journey, the costly sacrifice, and the heart that refuses to settle for tradition over truth. The Magi's story is your story. It is a reminder that no matter how far you feel you are from the temple, no matter how foreign your background, if you look up, there is a star, and if you follow it, it will lead you home. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the untold story of the wise men. This is Guardians of the Covenant. If this deep dive into the Word has stirred your spirit, subscribe and stay with us as we continue to unveil the mysteries of the King. Until next time, keep your eyes on the star.